want to start? Okay. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the State Energy Planning Board meeting. I'm Doreen Harris, President and CEO of the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, and the Chair of the State Energy Planning Board. As a reminder, today's meeting is open to the public to observe, both in person here in Albany and on our live stream. Thank you to everyone who is here with us today and to those tuned in online. Next slide, please. Before turning to our agenda, I would like to welcome the members of the State Energy Planning Board and their designees. I will ask that each board member or delegate introduce themselves. Going around the table, please share your name, title, and agency.
Hope Knight, President and CEO, Empire State Development.
Richard Ball, Commissioner, New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets.
Sean Mahar, Executive Deputy Commissioner for New York State DEC.
Yvonne Martinez, Deputy Commissioner for Policy, Strategy, and Research at the New York State Department of Labor.
Good afternoon, Rich Dewey, President and CEO of the New York Independent System Operator.
Morning. Rory Christian, Chair of the New York State Public Service Commission.
Good afternoon, Keisha Santiago. I'm here on behalf of Secretary of State Walter Mosley. I am the Deputy Secretary of State.
Terry O'Leary, Executive Deputy Commissioner with Homeland Security on behalf of Commissioner Bray.
Assemblymember Dee Dee Barrett, Chair of the Assembly Energy Committee on behalf of Speaker Carl Hastie.
Thank you all. For the record, I note we have a quorum for today's meeting, and I will now turn to our business for the day. Next slide, please. Please note for the record that this agenda was shared with board members and posted on the Energy Plan website for the public to review on Thursday, May 15th. Our agenda today is to review and approve the minutes of the May 1st, 2025 board meeting, to discuss gas system planning, to discuss select energy plan topic areas, and to discuss other business. Next slide, please. The first item on the agenda today are my opening remarks, which I will keep brief given our full agenda today. Next slide, please. I note that our Energy Planning Board members are closely monitoring federal developments, and I'd like to speak first to several recent developments relevant to our state. So clearly, and first, I am extraordinarily grateful to Governor Hochul, who continues to advocate for New York in regard to federal actions that impact our energy policies. And I'm pleased to note that, in fact, in this period, I myself have traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with members of the New York delegation, really discussing the desired impacts of our policies and work as a state. So first, I'm personally grateful for Governor Hochul's leadership on the Empire Wind 1 project. As covered in the press, the governor held countless conversations with Equinor, White House officials, including President Trump directly, and really bringing labor and business to the table to emphasize the importance of this project. And as a result, the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management lifted a federal stop work order on this project, and I'm very happy to report that Empire Wind 1 has resumed construction, including the 1,500 union workers who are contributing to it, the economic development, certainly in the Sunset Park area and beyond. So we see great momentum in that perspective, but also, secondly, we certainly do need to understand and ensure there is a full understanding of the value of the continued development of the wind resource in the Northeast. And so in this period, we saw the Attorney General James filing suit against the halt on new wind development from a day one executive order, and other actions in the budget reconciliation process that would seek to stop funding for interregional transmission planning, which will be a critical component of development of offshore wind. We also see litigation brought forward from a transportation perspective, focusing on restoring access to legislated funds for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program, that will allow the additional build out of EV charging infrastructure, in which Attorney General James, along with 16 other attorneys general, filed suit against the U.S. Department of Transportation for withholding access to these previously approved funds. We also see last week the U.S. Senate actions to overturn the California Clean Car Waiver for both advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks, really focusing on, in our view, a need, and in response, Governor Hochul was joined by 10 other governors in the launch of the Affordable Clean Car Coalition to sustain our transition to cleaner and more affordable cars. This leads us to a final development, which we are continuing to closely monitor and assess, really focusing on the federal budget reconciliation process, potential major implications of policy changes for EV tax credits, production and investment tax credits, as well as extended credits for nuclear energy production facilities. So certainly much to monitor, both from the perspective of reconciliation, but also at executive orders and agency actions as well. Next slide, please. Shifting back to our state budget, I am pleased to share that on May 9th, the New York Legislature passed and the governor signed the enacted budget for fiscal year 25-26. The investments included in this year's budget demonstrate our state's continued commitment to advancing clean energy policies, notably the $1 billion Sustainable Future Program, the largest single New York State budget commitment to climate and clean energy in history, focusing across all sectors of our economy, as you can see here today. In addition, the budget also includes $25 billion in additional funding for the Home Energy Affordability Program, which provides the lowest income New Yorkers with direct relief on their heating bills, and $300 million toward Power Up for energy system upgrades and the development of power-ready sites to support new economic development and reduce pressure on ratepayers for those upgrades. You can find more information about the state's budget on the Division of the Budget website. And next slide, please. And as I wrap up, I would be remiss if I didn't note the other major announcements from the past 2 weeks related to our energy work. Just on Friday, the Department of Environmental Conservation issued enforcement discretion for near-term compliance with the state's Advanced Clean Trucks and Advanced Clean Cars 2 requirements, providing certainty to manufacturers following unprecedented federal actions that challenge the implementation of clean vehicle requirements. We also saw major action from the New York Public Service Commission approving a plan for supporting ratepayer funding, energy efficiency, and building electrification programs for the coming 5 years, authorizing about $1 billion of funding per year over that period of time, including low to moderate income households and affordable multifamily buildings. The Public Service Commission also adopted the Clean Energy Standard operational reforms to increase flexibility, processes, and increase our procurement of renewable energy toward the 70% renewable goal, but also advancing renewables toward our offshore wind goals as well. And finally, Governor Hochul announced that contracts have been executed for 26 large-scale solar, onshore wind, and hydroelectric energy projects. Once operational, these projects will generate enough energy to power over 670,000 homes and spurring $6 billion in private investments. So certainly an active 2 weeks and more to come as this year advances for certain. So with that, I'm excited to turn to the rest of our agenda, which includes discussions from nationwide energy leaders, as well as deeper dives into our specific state energy plan topic areas. Next slide, please. The next item on the agenda today is to accept the meeting minutes of the State Energy Planning Board meeting held on May 1st, 2025. Are there any comments from the members on the minutes? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes into the record and we'll post them on the website. Do I have a second? All members in favor? Anyone opposed? The minutes are accepted into the record. Next slide. As I had mentioned, I am here to tee up the next discussion regarding the future of gas system planning. I would like to extend a warm welcome, certainly to our panelists today, who are leaders joining us virtually from all across the country, and of course, here in the room from our own state. But first, I will hand the mic over to PSC Chair Christian to share some context on gas planning in New York State. So over to you, Chair.
Thank you, President Harris. Now, Doreen and I are pleased to kick off the discussion today on what is a very important topic, the topic of natural gas system planning. In New York, the Public Service Commission plays a central role overseeing the gas system, providing regulatory oversight from when gas enters the system in the state to when it's used at our homes and businesses. We oversee system planning, audits, safety inspections, and the authorization of key infrastructure projects. And we also investigate any incidents that may occur to ensure safety and reliability. Our responsibility is both to manage the system as it is and to shape it to what it must become. Our goal, to maintain the gas system to enhance safety and reliability, and also to ensure the electric grid is able to handle the significant increase in electric demand expected through electrification. With electrification advancing steadily, we find ourselves in a time of profound change. New York recognizes that it is crucial to have strong gas system planning efforts in place to balance the transition of the gas system right alongside efforts to electrify, because we know that insufficient planning carries a cost: financial, environmental, and social. We want to avoid infrastructure expenses that are costly to consumers, unneeded, misplaced, or misaligned. And we also want to avoid fuel choices that are both at odds with the state energy plan and policies, and that result in increased emissions. These are just some of the adverse consequences of going down the wrong path. Now, at the Public Service Commission, we're committed to ensuring that the transition away from gas use is done through a managed process, one that avoids risks to system reliability and negative energy affordability impacts to consumers. That is why, in March of 2020, the Commission initiated its gas planning proceeding to develop a modernized gas system planning process. This process is transparent and open to the public and includes extensive stakeholder input, and this enables alignment with the state's clean energy policies. Since then, the Commission has issued several orders to implement this process and reviewed the long-term gas plans submitted by several of the state's natural gas utilities, including one currently under review by National Grid, who I believe is here today to present. These plans provide supply and demand forecasts over a 20-year horizon and include evaluation of supply assets, both existing and new, that may be needed to meet forecasted demand. We've made great progress over the last 5 years, but there's always more to be done. And I'm pleased to be joined by colleagues from other pioneering states that are also leading the charge on innovative gas system planning efforts across the country. We look forward to hearing the progress that is occurring in each state and taking lessons learned that may help inform our state energy plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Christian. I'll now hand the microphone over to John Williams, NYSERD as Executive Vice President for Policy and Regulatory Affairs, to introduce our expert panel for today. John.
Thank you, Chair Harris, and thank you, Chair Christian, also for those opening remarks on gas planning. The one thing that we are always learning when we're doing our energy planning and when we even get down to specific system planning is that, we oftentimes look at it from just a New York purview. But truth of the matter is that the same kind of consideration is happening in states throughout the country, particularly those with very similar types of policy drivers that we have here in New York. So we're very pleased today to have colleagues from Massachusetts, California, and Colorado joining us to describe the process that they're undergoing, helping us with not only our gas system planning and considerations, but how that also helps to inform how we think about our energy plan more broadly. So we're looking forward to hearing from each of you, on some of the key elements that you consider as you think about your systems and the challenges that you're facing, as we think about systems that are in transition, as we think about new technologies coming into play and how we need to think about existing systems over time that we're going to need to continue to rely on and need to have the level of reliability as we think about new efforts that come into those systems. So thanks all for being here. I'm going to just jump into hearing from them. First, and what I'll do is we'll have presentations from each of the three panelists, and then we'll open it up to discussion for the board members. So, so I'll just run through each of them. I have gotten the evil eye from the chair of the planning board to keep it at the time limit. So guys, don't mind if I jump in at some point in time during the presentation. But what we will do is start with a neighbor, but one who is also not a stranger to New York. So Jamie Van Nostrand, he's the chair of the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, but Jamie has a long history with New York as well, including as being executive director of the Pace Energy and Climate Center, which I myself am also an alum. But Jamie, it is great to have you back with us today. I think you understand the layout of what happens in New York, but very interested to hear about your thoughts on how you are approaching gas planning in Massachusetts. So handing it over to Jamie.
Thanks very much, John, and it's a real pleasure to join you. Nice to see you, President Harris, and good to see you, Chair Christian, other members of the New York State Energy Planning Board, and always good to see my old friend, John Williams. So I just wanted to provide an overview. I'm going to mostly focus on the transition issues rather than just necessarily the resource planning or supply planning process. So we get to the next slide, just to provide the regulatory context. What are we trying to achieve in Massachusetts? This is the statutory charge that I looked at. When I got here, I've been chair since May of 2023. And much like New York, we had started a proceeding in 2020 called the Future of Gas, the 2080. It was DPU 2080. But the context for that was going all the way back to 2008 with the Global Warming Solutions Act, which established the net zero by 2050. But then more recently, in 2022, there was a Clean Energy and Climate Plan, which was adopted pursuant to climate legislation passed in Massachusetts the preceding year. But that took that net zero target down to sector-specific emissions reduction targets for 2025 and 2030. So we see that next slide. So this slide shows, if you focus on that kind of the turquoise band there, that we're just focusing on the building sector. So that shows you where we need to go from 1990 into the far right. So the 1990 is the far left axis, the far right axis is 2030. So that shows you the reductions that we need to achieve consistent with the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. And then below that, the table below shows you in the residential and commercial sector how we translate those greenhouse gas reductions from what we had in 1990 to what we need to achieve in 2025 and 2030. So I looked at what our charge was in the DPU 2080 order, our Future of Gas proceeding. It was really, how do we get the LDCs on a pathway to achieve these greenhouse gas targets, which is, in my mind, are statutory obligations given the framework that we have in Massachusetts. Next slide, John. So this, as I mentioned, the Future of Gas proceeding was started in 2020. We issued an order on December 6th of 2023, primarily a regulatory framework. We've issued some general findings and principles going forward, one of which was that electrification is the primary pathway to achieving these greenhouse gas reductions targets. A number of different scenarios were presented in the proceeding, lots of stakeholder involvement, lots of discovered, pretty extensive process. And electrification would be both air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. There was a lot of discussion of network geothermal as part of the order, but that's the primary pathway. Some of the key takeaways from that order is the non-gas pipeline alternatives. Basically, we made it clear in the order we don't want to do anything to suggest non-recovery of the existing, or anything to jeopardize the recovery of the existing investment in the natural gas distribution framework. But going forward, we expect to see a look at investments with a different lens and discouraging additional investment in natural gas infrastructure. And we're going to require the consideration of non-gas pipeline alternatives. Again, that includes primarily electrification, but also demand basically demand side resources as well. But are there things we can do to avoid investing in making additional investment in natural gas infrastructure? And then more recently, just within the last, I guess, 60 days, April 1, each of the LDCs had to file a climate compliance plan. And that's the primary document that says, show us that you're on a pathway to achieve these sector targets and the net zero by 2050. And as part of that, those filings that we're just actually getting our way through now, they also filed with us the natural gas pipeline, the NPA, the non-pipeline alternatives analysis. That was an extensive stakeholder process. The LDCs came up with proposals for how they're going to calculate these NPAs, and that was shared with the stakeholders. That was included as part of the climate compliance plans, which were filed with us again April 1, and we're going to start proceedings on that. Hearings, I think, are as soon as next week, technical sessions, to start working our way through those compliance plans. Each of the LDCs, each of those climate compliance plans will be litigated in formal proceedings. Another piece coming out of that 2080 order was integrated energy planning, which I'm sure we're going to hear more about today, but that's, requiring the LDCs and the electric distribution companies to be working together, because as Chair Christian mentioned, if we're looking at decommissioning part of a gas service territory, we need to make sure that the EDC that will have the capability to basically take on that additional electrical load. Do the next slide. The other thing we have coming up is next March, each of the LDCs is required to file a target electrification project, and the order requires them to work with the applicable electric distribution company, as I mentioned, to make sure there's the capability to take on that additional load. National Grid actually filed their demonstration project last December, about 15 months ahead of the deadline. A couple of communities in Massachusetts, Leominster and Winthrop, but they're looking at 118 potential customers, 14 different segments. Can we avoid spending money on repairing leak-prone pipe and instead electrify these customers with air source heat pumps, take out all the gas appliances and replace them with electric appliances? So we're very early on in that process, but that's the other LDCs will be following on in the next few months. Next slide, John. So the current challenges, one is we just issued an order in April 30th, about a month ago. Since the Gas Leaks Act was passed in 2018, we've been addressing leak-prone pipe in Massachusetts. It's been a basically accelerated rate recovery. The LDCs were spending up to a cap of 3% of their annual revenue on repairing leak-prone pipe. We scaled that back in these orders to 2.5%. We also provided for no carrying charges on any deferred amounts above that cap, basically trying to get this spending under control, trying to discourage additional investment in the LDC and distribution system, and trying to encourage more repair and relining rather than replacing. We're currently also looking at whether or not to continue authorizing line extension allowances. Does that make sense? Given is it still in the public interest to allow LDCs to provide allowances to more or less subsidize the addition of new customers? And then I think an issue that we're all struggling with in the various states is when you do these demonstration projects and electrifying, can you get 100% participation of the customers for that electrification alternative? We learned in the GSEP proceeding when the gas companies filed their non-gas pipeline alternative analysis, they required 100% participation by the customers in order to decommission a portion of the pipe and electrify the customers, and that is a big challenge. So we're going to be issuing an order probably in the next couple of months to try to provide some guidance on what we think our statutory authority is in Massachusetts, because it's definitely an issue that the utilities will be grappling with as they develop their demonstration projects for filing March 1. I'm happy to answer questions. Thanks, John.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. Really appreciate that. Great. So we'll move on to the next panelist. And this is another friend of mine from California. This is Andrew McAllister. He's a commissioner on the California Energy Commission. Andrew has been really a leading national voice in decarbonization and energy efficiency and how we integrate systems across the board, whether it's looking at new technology systems into an existing electric system, but also how those systems also interplay. Had a great privilege working with Andrew on the national stage for a number of years now. So, but Andrew, hopefully you're here and look forward to hearing about what you all have going on in California.
Great. Well, thanks, John. It's really a pleasure to be here and to see everyone on the board. Thanks for convening this discussion, and hard act to follow here with Chair Van Nostrand, but I'll do my best. But you've teed up beautifully a lot of the sort of main issues, and so a lot that I don't have to say just now that you've gotten them out, and just kudos to Massachusetts for its leading work on the future of gas issue. And there are a lot of themes that echo across the country, all the way to California. And great to see you, Chair Harris, and really appreciate all your leadership, actually, and certainly all your trips to Washington. So maybe just a slight bit of context before I jump into the a little deeper issue of the gas planning itself. But really, congratulations on Empire Wind. Just that was huge. Everyone is happy to see that. Really appreciate all the leadership in NYSERDA, and have really enjoyed working with you, John, on through NASIO and other fora for trying to keep sort of our leadership position in earnest at the state level, and really keep states in the middle of I think the key transitions that we need to make in their decarbonization journeys, and really a lot of the innovation comes at the state and even the local level. And being able to really influence that, I think, is a great place to be for a leading state like California and like New York. Our collaboration is super important. I think we're facing complementary but somewhat different challenges. We've done a lot on transportation, that leadership trying to preserve. And thanks for calling out, Noreen, the clean car waiver issue. And I think there's some near-term roadblocks, but we'll overcome those. And I think we need to continue on the great implementation, and that is up and down the whole chain. I think California has it's underappreciated how much we've been building on the supply side over the last few years. Since Gavin Newsom became governor, we put in 16 gigawatts of clean supply. About half of that is different kinds of renewables, mostly solar, and about half of that is actually battery storage. So, and we've got more than 10 gigawatts now of battery storage in strategic locations, and that's really helped us get through the last few summers, last couple summers, particularly. We had some what would have been huge challenges, and we've ridden those through without any sort of flex alerts or emergency alerts of any kind. So a lot of build out of our system, of our grid, going on now. Another kind of under maybe not quite well known fact is that the Energy Commission, it is our state energy office in California. We're a large agency. We have about 800 people now, and we do a lot of things that state energy offices don't typically do. And one of which is forecasting all the different fuels, both in front of the meter and behind the meter. So that's liquid fuels and everything that comes into the economy, but certainly most critically electricity and gas systems. So we do that forecast, and we're seeing gas demand decline. We do not have a lot of we have a tiny amount of heating oil and the like, sort of traditional East Coast traditional fuels. We really have pervasive natural gas distribution. About 90% of our retail customers, our core customers, have gas pipelines, gas pipes to their homes. And so that's a big system to unwind in California. And we don't really have, we have some propane in the rural areas. The rest of it basically is propane. There's some all electric, obviously, that's growing. But we do have a lot of infrastructure, a lot of sunk cost investment in the gas side. So really just appreciate the task ahead of the public service commissions, our Public Utilities Commission in California, but all of the public service commissions across the country, having to really grapple with how do you deal with the stranded asset problem and all the different things that come along with fuel substitution. So we have a 6 million heat pump goal by 2030, which is just around the corner. We're about 1.5 million now, so that's going to drive a lot of fuel substitution. But of course, there are no easy solutions here. Just our electric system, our rates are already quite high. We're dealing with impacts of climate change and fire, and building insurance, and also just maintaining the safety of the existing gas system, and electricity it's not going to be able to support a huge amount of fuel cost that will be incurred, restructuring the gas system. So gas system costs are not declining as quickly as gas use is projected to decline as we increasingly electrify. So how do we reduce costs? We are looking at pruning the system. The PUC has done quite a bit of work studying what that might look like. We've done quite a bit of work at the Energy Commission. I'm actually going to post a link to a joint agency report on the future of gas and on decarbonizing our systems. Right here, I'm just going to, hopefully in the Q&A that'll work and go through. Not sure if it will. Actually, it's not, doesn't look like it's letting me send it. But however I can post that, you can coach me after I wrap. But reducing costs on the gas side, at the same time, we increase the flexibility on the regulatory regime, allowing the electric sector and the gas sectors to kind of share costs to some extent, and that requires changing the obligation to serve, redefining the obligation to serve in many places, including California. So linking up the gas and the electricity system in an integrated way, and really being rigorous about how we study the gas system to figure out where those best opportunities are to unwind it and decommission swaths of it, because that's the only way we reduce really one of the main ways we reduce infrastructure costs. So the Energy Commission has funded development of a platform to really put in place an analytical framework for targeted electrification and strategic gas commissioning. So that's been funded under our R&D division. And so that's, I think, a good step forward in collaboration with PG&E to develop really some rigor around this, and really what is our sort of cost basis, or what is our how do we really ground truth this and have the joint staff paper really, I think, helps lay out these issues of how do we make sure that we're operating with a common set of facts, and we really understand the systems. We target the communities and the areas of the system that are most likely, that should be highest priority for that first wave of decommissioning. We also have done a lot to just stop digging the hole deeper in terms of getting away from extending the grid, the gas grid, into more and more places. And so I'll give our Public Utilities Commission quite a bit of kudos for a couple of policy decisions they made a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. One, to disallow rate basing or disallow cost recovery for the gas infrastructure first, for dual fuel new developments. So if you've got a build or production build scenario, they would not be able to socialize the cost of the gas grid going into that development. And then shortly thereafter, the PUC disallowed the cost recovery for the electric extension also that would go into dual fuel new developments. And so that has turned the tide tremendously, so that around 90% now of new developments in California are all electric. And the builders are really learning how to do that and get comfortable with that. And so that's, at least we're not making the problem larger. But the electric sector, that presents, obviously the challenges that have been mentioned already about making sure the electric sector is ready for that load. We think by and large it is, but we really we're in a kind of a rough spot right now where costs are relatively high in the electric sector because we're keeping online a bunch of old resources that are pretty expensive. We're building out quickly new resources that are less expensive. But we think that once we get to sort of a declining marginal cost again with renewables and storage coming down in price, the electric sector will increasingly going forward be able to support some of those costs. I think one idea I want to toss out there is just we think dual fuel utilities are really the key place where a lot of this will be sort of demonstrated and probably litigated, but they are in the best position to figure out how to co-manage the expanding electric sector alongside of a declining gas sector. So I think that both investor-owned utilities, most of the dual fuel utilities in the country are investor-owned. There are a few exceptions: San Antonio, CPS Energy, Palo Alto. utilities that does electric and gas, but those publicly owned ones are few and far between. Maybe there's some co-ops here and there, but I'm not sure about that. But I think the really leaning into our dual fuel utilities is something we ought to be doing. Let's see, again, and then the PUC also a couple years ago did a fuel substitution market study that also helped sort of unpack the relative challenges in electric and gas sector to co-managing this going forward. So as the PUC opened up their efficiency programs, their public purpose programs to do fuel substitution, to support fuel substitution from gas to electric and end uses, across the state, they buttressed that with a market study to sort of show the various kind of ins and outs of cost effectiveness of doing that and the ratepayer benefits of doing that. So I think I think I'll wrap up there and just say, again, that collaboration that we have with New York is, I think, we're in different contexts, obviously, sort of our infrastructure, our climate, our sort of, regulatory structures that we operate within. But there is so much commonality, and I just really appreciate the board here getting together and engaging across state lines to help us figure this out together. No one entity is gonna get this done all together. So I really feel like it's a lot to learn from one another, a lot to demonstrate, a lot of experiences to be shared. Looking forward to hearing from Keith from Colorado and having discussion after that. So I'll wrap up there. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That was great. Much appreciated, and much appreciate the words on the collaboration. And speaking of that, we'll turn to our third presenter, Keith Hay from Colorado. Colorado, very similar to New York, is way out in front in thinking about policy drivers that are going to be looking at transitions in our energy system. And Keith is certainly in the forefront of doing that. He is Senior Director for Policy at the Colorado Energy Office, and as a result, he's like kind of partly leading with us, the national dialogue on how we think about gas change. And Colorado, I might also add, is just an interesting case when you're thinking about both a state that has very significant policy that it's looking to realize, but at the same time is also a state with quite a significant industry in terms of fuels extraction, and how you balance those interests moving through the state is certainly an interesting proposition, but that might be for another day. But Keith, I'll turn it over to you, and look forward to hearing what you're doing in Colorado.
John, thank you, and happy to come back on another day and talk about Colorado's extractive industries and how they play into this conversation on the gas system. I really want to recognize the board and appreciate the time and opportunity to be here, as well as be able to participate in the conversation with Jamie and Andrew. It is always an incredible opportunity to learn every time I get to hear from them, and so I'm learning already yet again today. I think I'll start by echoing two of the things that Andrew said, and one is that the dual fuel utilities are likely going to be the place that we see this conversation carry out first. That certainly is what we are looking at here in Colorado, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then just this conversation around sort of the role of the electric utilities in coordination and conversation with the gas utilities outside of those dual fuel utilities, and the challenges that we're seeing there. And again, something I wanted to talk about. So if you want to go to the next slide, I thought I would try and do four things in the time that I have today. First, just a little bit about who the Energy Office is and our role in the state in gas utility planning. Second, to give a little bit of an overview of Colorado. We're a little bit of a different state, and it creates some challenges and opportunities for us in this conversation, and maybe opportunities for New York to learn from. Then to try and provide a little bit of context on both our legislative and our regulatory framework, and there's a lot there to unpack. So hopefully I'll just tee up a conversation that we can dive into questions on. And then to try and wrap up with a couple of ongoing proceedings before our Public Utilities Commission. So if you want to go to the next slide. So just as I set the context on who the Energy Office is, we're a non-regulatory agency, but we have intervention of right at our State Public Utilities Commission. Over the 6 years that I've been with the office, we've been active in about 30 to 40 PUC proceedings a year. And so we are very active and engaged in this conversation around gas utility transitions in the state. So what I'm showing here is just a snapshot map of our state's gas utility service territories and the respective sizes of those utilities. So you can see Xcel Energy there is our largest utility, both in terms of customers and percent of greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and they are a dual fuel utility. So they've got about 1.5 million electric customers, about 1.4 million gas customers, and about 1 million of those are dual fuel customers. On the bottom of that chart, we've got Atmos Energy, and they are by far our smallest utility here in the state. But as you think about that map and see the picture of where those utilities provide service, sort of two facts that I'd love to share with you. First is that, in Colorado, about 78% of our homes are heated by natural gas. And so that is a pervasive infrastructure. And both Atmos and Colorado Natural Gas over the last several years have really been working to extend that network into places that were previously unserved and where propane had been the fuel of choice. And so part of what that means is we've got a relatively new investment and a relatively new rate base that, as we think about this transition, is really one that hasn't been recovered for on a prior historic basis. The other is that those handful of gas utilities, and I should say Colorado Springs, Andrew, to your point, is one of the few municipal utilities that is dual fuel. They are both a gas and electric utility. They're actually 5-service utility, but for today, 2 fuels. But the majority of the rest of those utilities share over 50 electric providers. And so the majority of those are not regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. And in fact, only 2 are, Xcel Energy and Black Hills Electric. And what's interesting about the Black Hills Electric piece is that they are a non-overlapping service territory with Black Hills Gas. So while they provide both, they're not functionally a dual fuel utility. And so it creates this challenging set of timelines. If you want to go to the next slide. So what are we doing here in Colorado, and sort of where do we take the lead on our decarbonization here in the state and our building strategy? It really starts with 2 different bills in the state that created economy-wide greenhouse gas pollution reduction targets. And so we have a target in place today that requires, on an economy-wide basis, that the state get to a 50% reduction by 2030, ultimately reaching net zero by 2050. And in order to help us implement and meet those economy-wide emissions reduction targets, we have put out 2 different greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmaps that have called for sector-based solutions to meet those emissions reduction targets. And what you see across the bottom on this slide is 4 different bills from 2021 and 2022 that really directed our investor-owned utilities, and in some cases, Colorado Springs, our large municipal provider, to implement different kinds of planning requirements. And so we have changed the way we're doing gas DSM here in the state. We've implemented what we refer to as clean heat planning requirements for our investor-owned and our municipally owned gas provider here in the state. We also have requirements for our investor-owned electric utilities to come forward with beneficial electrification plans. So that's the big sort of legal planning framework that really has been guiding the efforts of our Public Utilities Commission. And so if you want to go to that next slide, what does that look like from sort of a commission perspective? It looks like a lot. And I spent 10 years at our Public Utilities Commission, half of that time as an advisor. And I feel bad for my former colleagues with the amount of work that we have put on them in all of this different planning. And it's worth saying that planning we have never done here in Colorado. In the 10 years that I was at the Public Utilities Commission prior to coming here 6 years ago, we had never seen a gas utility plan. In fact, the few gas dockets that we had were either rate cases or what we used to call safety and integrity rider proceedings. We had a tracker account for our utilities to do the work that Jamie was talking about in terms of pipeline safety mitigation efforts. And for Xcel, that was about $500 million a year in investment year over year for a number of years. Starting in 2021, we really see the emergence of all of these different proceedings before the Public Utilities Commission that both implement a requirement for the gas utilities to begin planning, but then also put in place the emissions reduction requirement that they are planning to. And so by statute, the gas utilities are required to get to a 22% emissions reduction by 2030 from a 2015 baseline. That in and of itself sounds challenging, but when you account for the growth of gas in the state, that can look like anywhere between a 40 and a 60% reduction to get back to that baseline in a very short period of time. Statute also required the Public Utilities Commission to adopt post-2030 emissions reduction targets for the utilities, and we expect that they'll open a rulemaking this summer to do that, and that they will move forward to adopt at least a 2035 target. It's a little unclear if they'll go past 2035 just because of the changes in the macroeconomic conditions, changes in the state's economy as well, and the changing of technologies in that. So if we want to go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about takeaways and then also some other proceedings. So this is just a snapshot of that clean heat planning framework, and I think that is the guiding structure that the commission uses to plan emissions reductions here in Colorado. But outside of that clean heat planning framework, they have also done things like eliminate the gas line extension policy. So we're no longer, again, subsidizing those gas line extensions. We also, in order to enable this clean heat planning framework, passed legislation that removed a ban in statute on fuel substitution and fuel switching, so that we now have enabled our dual fuel utilities to actually come forward with plans that would move a customer from gas over to electric. We are working hard, in addition to electrification, to implement thermal energy systems here in the state, both on a network basis and on an individual utility basis. In fact, we just had an announcement recently by Lennar Homes, a large home builder here in Colorado, that in partnership with Dandelion Energy, based up in the Northeast, and Xcel, our largest utility, is going to build out several thousand all electric high efficiency homes here in the state. And they are going to do that with ground source heat pump units, which, as we talk about that energy transition, I think that's something that we are focused on, because here in Colorado, as we look at electrification and taking that 78% of homes that are heated by gas and transitioning them, we are also looking at shifting our system from a summer peak to a winter peak quite significantly, and trying to think through what that means from an electric sector side, and recognizing that to the extent that we can implement thermal service, we are reducing that winter system peak and that need to invest in the electric grid. We are seeing that play out in two proceedings at the Public Utilities Commission, and John will talk through these and then wrap up. We have one that we refer to as the Mountain System proceeding, where Xcel Energy has come forward with a series of non-pipeline investments to avoid between $400 and $500 million in gas system upgrades. And as part of that, we are looking at the electric side investments there and trying to mitigate both the gas and the electric side investments with the implementation of thermal energy networks, as well as electrification. But to a comment that Jamie had made, one of the significant challenges we are seeing in that is customer adoption. If we are going to, decommission part of that gas grid up there and really ensure that we're not growing gas load in the future, how do we get all of the customers on a section or a segment of that pipe to commit to those non-gas alternatives and then allow us to decommission that site? As part of the answer to that question, we actually passed a bill here that's resulted in a commission filing we refer to as 1370. That was the bill number. And it required the Energy Office to actually solicit interest from local governments across the state to participate as gas pilot planning communities, a lot to say. We then identified those communities to the Public Utilities Commission with a recommendation on which ones the commission should move forward with. But that would result in, or will result in, a partnership directive between Xcel Energy and those gas pilot planning communities to look at what sections of pipe in those communities could be decommissioned, and really puts the onus on the local government to do that community engagement and to bring stakeholders to the table, but puts the onus on the utilities to ensure that the local governments have the right type of information that they need to plan with their customers. So that community, local government, utility partnership is really one that we are focusing on. That filing is just happening now, so I don't have any results to share with you, but we are excited and optimistic that that might become a future model here in Colorado as we think about that transition. And with that, John, I'll wrap it up and look forward to the dialogue and the conversation.
Yeah, awesome, Keith. Actually, there's a lot to that last little bit you put there, but maybe more on that at another time. But appreciate all three of you joining us, helping us all out. It sounds like, we are all kind of navigating all of this together. Maybe now we can do it together. I think maybe we haven't done enough of that. But with that, we can open it up for board discussion. So I'll just see if any of the board members have any questions or thoughts to share.
I can't read the room, but I did want to kind of chime in with one high-level comment, if that's okay. This is Andrew.
Go for it, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I said, the Energy Commission does forecasting for electricity and gas. And I think probably all three of us would agree with this statement, but the math around what rates have to do, if you look at things in a traditional way, in the coming 5, 10, 15 years, it is breathtaking how high rates would have to go if we just sort of let things occur naturally as people get off the grid, off the gas grid, go on the electric grid, and ever more rapidly declining gas consumption, and not that declining infrastructure costs. And you just do the math, and the per therm costs would, in order to get full cost recovery, would have to go up by, literally by mid-century, it would be more than 10x in real terms. And so I think that I wanted to just put a finer point on the task that is in front of us here, because we do need creative ways to avoid that happening, because the people that are going to be left on the gas grid are the people who can least afford the electrification transition. And so it's really a very serious equity issue, and it's going to require some kind of a deal, in the probably likely the midterm, but politically it'll just be untenable where that's likely to happen. So it won't get to that point, in all likelihood, but it will require some kind of a deal and an understanding. It'll be based on the work that we all do to figure out what the best path forward is.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Chair Christian.
Thank you. Appreciated the presentations. Saw a lot of parallels with what we're doing in New York, and it's good to see like minds think alike in many ways. I think one area where I'd love to hear from your relative perspective is an understanding of the non-pipe alternatives, non-gas alternatives described in different ways. How effective are the utilities at getting that entire customer base in a particular area to move forward with an alternative to gas and actually electrify? I'm curious to hear how effective they've been in your respective regions.
Thanks, Rob. I'll take a shot at that, Chair Christian. We'll know very shortly with National Grid with its two projects. As I mentioned, there's 118 customers. They've identified 14 different segments. But again, they've said unless they have 100% participation of the customers on those segments, they're not going to be able to move forward with those electrification projects. It's going to be a challenge. And I think we're going to see that Eversource with the first, the nation's first neighborhood scale underground network geothermal project was very successful with customer engagement. However, there was the gas pipeline is still in place, so we didn't look at the situation where a single customer could necessarily thwart the development. But I think that's going to be. We just had a deliberations section this morning, very briefly with the staff on those climate compliance plans, and that's one of the issues we're going to explore very thoroughly is the customer engagement, because that's so important, is to be able to that first contact you have with the customer to try to convince them to consider electrifying. It's so important.
I'll just quickly chime in with 2 points. One, we have, like, as I said, some rural areas where there is not a gas distribution grid. We had the town of Paradise that burned down in a fire, you'll remember. I think it's been about 7 years. And as they build back, this is a very active discussion. They did not have a gas distribution grid, but they had a lot of people on delivered fuels. And so sort of working through that issue, whether all electric or sort of status quo with a propane tank in the backyard, how that kind of shakes out. So learning about customer preferences there. Second, there's a piece of legislation that became law a couple years ago. Actually, I think last legislative session, 2024, in California, Senate Bill 1221. That requires our PUC to develop 30 neighborhood scale decarbonization zones. And the intent of that bill, that legislation, is to do sort of on a somewhat larger scale, what Jamie just mentioned, which is work with individual communities and figure out how to get that done. And it may involve, actually taking that, 80-20 rule, maybe you have 20% who, or hopefully it's much less than that, but you have some number that are kind of not on board, and you figure out ways to provide them with molecules, but short of building the grid out, short of bringing grid gas to them so you can actually decommission. And that builds on the CEC's efforts around what we call the Advanced Energy Communities program. And we started in Oakland, a couple other places, to fund just this kind of transition to electricity on a neighborhood level. And the report that will come out about, say, the Oakland Eco Block is very instructive about how folks can work together in the neighborhood to get this done. There's a lot of motivation. We have a lot of environmental, residents in California that are very environmentally inclined. But even so, the cost and sort of the collaboration, the neighborhood scale stuff, it does require, in the existing building context, existing neighborhood, a lot of really social work. Really a lot of socialization of these ideas and a lot of on the ground neighborhood level advocacy. So that's the hard work that's ahead of us.
And I guess if I may, Chair Christian, just add 3 things quickly to what Jamie and Andrew have shared. We don't have the results yet. This is all relatively new to us, but I will say one of the things that my office has focused on quite a bit in the different PUC planning processes is a requirement for the utilities to come forward with robust engagement plans, to vet those plans through the commission, and for the utilities to have approval. In other words, we don't want to just leave it to the utility to go off and do that work. We think that there should be clear direction from the commission about how they are talking about their engagement plan and how they are talking with their customers. The second thing I would just again highlight 1370, our bill here, that will require our largest dual fuel utility to work with local governments and really put the local governments to some extent in the driver's seat of identifying what communities might be ripe for non-pipeline alternatives and for the engagement with their customers. And then the third thing I would say is, as we have thought about customers and customer engagement in the context of decommissioning part of the gas pipeline system, one thing that's become apparent to us in the last kind of 2 or 2.5 years is the number of what we here in Colorado call transport customers. And those are gas customers who essentially take pipeline service from the utility, but procure gas on the open market. For several of our gas LDCs, that can be 50% of their throughput. And so and they're not managed under any of our current legislative framework. In fact, they're not really managed in a regulatory framework very much either. But that 50% gas throughput could really challenge our efforts to decommission parts of the system. And so we are starting to think through that. Not really an engagement question, but how do we get to those big customers is part of our challenge as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks. Thanks all three of you. I'm getting a bit of the high sign here to go, but just want to say, lots more, I think, for the 4 states here to be collaborating on as we kind of walk this new gas planning journey together. And hope you don't mind that we reach out again at some point in time in the future. But thanks very much for being with us today. Very helpful discussion for all of us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Yes, I'll add my thanks for your time and expertise. And as we transition to our next speaker, I did want to acknowledge Commissioner Dominguez with the Department of Transportation, who is here. Thank you for joining us, and back to you, John.
Great, thanks. Good. Well, we're going to move on. So you can hear what we wanted our panelists to really talk about is kind of the issues that we all need to be thinking about when it comes to the gas system. Again, thinking about our policy drivers, what are the new technologies coming in, the interplay across different systems. This is actually a bit of a long-term view, right? We're thinking about it on a 20-year horizon, as Chair Christian said. That's what's happening at the other states as well. There are a lot of near-term issues that we do need to take account of when we think about, what is the nature of the system that we're still reliant upon, and what are going to be the issues that we are going to have to take account of as we think about our systems moving into transition. And so to help us understand what some of those issues are, we are joined here with Ross Torini, who is the Chief Operating Officer of New York Gas for National Grid, who has been experiencing, some of those near-term issues on an everyday basis. So, Ross, very much look forward to hearing, the issues that you're taking into account, and how do we think about that, particularly from that near-term perspective as we, as we look at our energy plan on a broader basis.
John and President Harris, thank you for the invitation to come and speak on the behalf of National Grid, and also to talk a little bit about gas reliability. So I do think we have some slides. Yep. So just a little bit about National Grid. We operate in New York and Massachusetts. We have 9,200 employees focused in New York on both our electric and our gas businesses. In upstate New York, we serve electricity and natural gas. We do about 1.7 million electric customers in upstate New York and about 600,000 gas customers. So we do play in that dual fuel space in that area. And we've actually done a lot of work on integrated energy planning, which is another topic for a different time. In downstate, we serve about 1.9 million natural gas customers in New York City and Long Island. And if we can actually just flip the slide to, yep, that slide is, actually go one more. So a little bit about the gas system. We supply gas to homes, businesses, and to power generation in New York. But a little bit about the gas system itself. There's really 3 big components. There's the production fields or the wellheads. And for us, that gas either comes out of the Marcellus Shale or out of Canada or from the Gulf. There's the interstate pipelines, which if you look on the slide here, you'll see Algonquin, Transco, TETCO, Millennium. They interconnect the production fields with our gas system. And then there is the gas distribution system, which we own in downstate New York. When you talk about a reliable system, you need all 3 of those components to be reliable. You need the production field to be reliable to deliver gas to you. You need the interstate pipeline to be reliable to deliver gas to you. And then you need your own system to be the gas distribution system to be reliable to distribute gas out to all your customers. There are some challenges that we face on the interstate system right now, which we'll get into a little bit more. But one of the biggest things that we see is just the size of the amount of energy that gets delivered through the gas system compared to the electric system. I'll use the New York City for an example. But we're a winter peaking system, and electric systems tend to be summer peaking system. But our winter peaking system for gas in New York City delivers about 2.25 trillion BTUs on a peak day. The electric system in New York City on a summer peak delivers about 750 million BTUs on a peak day. So we're about 3 times the size. So a tremendous amount of energy that comes through the system. And then there's more challenges just with the congested infrastructure in New York City. So we do a lot of, when you look at gas systems, there's a couple things that you're going to, and we'll talk about 2 out of the 3 in this presentation today, but you need to make sure you have enough supply for your customers. You need to make sure the system is safe and has good integrity. That's really against catastrophic failures and leaks. And the third thing is the reliability, to make sure that you'll be able to manage any contingencies that happen upstream of you. On the interstate pipelines, one of the big challenges is if they have an interruption on their system or there's a problem with their compressor stations, they get to declare force majeure, which is basically an act of God, which holds them with no liability and holds us basically holding the bag at the end. Another challenge that we see with this is there is no independent system operator upstream of us that looks at managing that supply. And we're going to get into a little bit of a sort of a case example about Winter Storm Elliott, but in that instance, we only can rely on ourselves, right? I have to figure out how to manage the supply, the portfolio, what assets we have, how we ask for help, because there is no independent system operator or system operator across the Northeast or New York State that manages gas system. So if we could just flip to the next slide. So pre-COVID, we saw our gas demand grew at about 2.5% a year. Post-COVID, we're about 1.2% a year. But in order to sort of address and give a lot of optionality around climate change, we built what we called a distributed infrastructure solution back in 2019. It relied a lot on energy efficiency, demand response, electrification, and non-pipes alternatives. And we talked a little bit about non-pipes alternatives before, but the biggest challenge around non-pipe alternatives is customer choice. We've, in our previous New York downstate rate case, we tried about 30 projects. We never got more of a 7% uptake, and we never got any of them off the ground. In this last rate case, we made a lot of improvements to the upfront process on how we engage with the customer, how we try to incent them. But we offer about $60,000 or $65,000 of incentives per customer to switch, and we still have not been able to get anybody over. So it's, you know, I try to describe it, it's like, you know, trying to get all of us in this room to agree on which one we like better, red or green, right? Like it's just, it's hard to get 100% of your people to do it because that's how you fund it. Instead of actually making the investment in leak-prone pipe to replace that section of main, you would take that money and use it to electrify all those customers. So it's this one or the other choice that you have to make. We have an incredible demand response program. Matter of fact, it's the largest in the country for a gas utility. On a cold day, we shed about 160,000 customers that switch over to fuel oil. Obviously, the challenge with switching over to fuel oil at that point is increased emissions. But we do have a very extensive program there. But the challenge there, it's also very mature, right? So a lot of those big customers that we've already relied on, we've already built into the program. As a matter of fact, we have about 2,000 non-firm customers, 500 firm commercial customers, as well as 38,000 residential thermostats that we do. The 38,000 residential thermostats that we do for peak shaving, it's really a drop in the bucket, right? The vast majority of that savings comes out of those 2,000 non-firm and 500 firm customers. We can flip the slide. I'm just going to talk a little bit about gas demand here. But right now, there's a lot, this slide's really busy. Trees don't focus on it. What this just really lays out is that we do have supply gaps coming. A forecast, we have a very sophisticated forecast team, but a forecast is exactly that. It's a forecast. It's dependent on lots of different factors. Matter of fact, the biggest factors that impact our gas forecasts going forward are actually the economic factors. So how fast is New York State's domestic product growing? How fast is New York City's economy growing? Or how slow is it growing? Or is it going into recession? Any of those factors will swing the forecast year over year, right? And we all see what's really happening right now with the economy. It's sort of in turmoil. It's really hard to predict where it's going. Right now in downstate New York, we have a supply gap predicting in 28, 29, and in upstate New York in 30 and 31. What does that mean? Well, that means that we're not going to be able to hook up new customers, and there's not going to be gas for economic development. We do have just another little piece of our sort of the unique sort of situation that our national grid downstate utilities find themselves is we sit at the end of everybody's pipeline system, right? So a lot of the pipelines come up through the Gulf Coast. They go through all sorts of states. They pass through Pennsylvania, Connecticut. They go up to New England. When they come to us, they end. There's no customer on the other side of us. In fact, we do get a lot of our gas that passes through the Con Ed system through a joint facilities agreement that we have. We take deliveries at each other's gates, and we actually, at Newtown Creek in New York City and in Lake Success up in Queens, we actually take deliveries from Con Ed on the coldest days of the year from their gas distribution systems to our gas distribution system. So we are very much sort of tied to the challenges of if anything happens upstream on another customer or upstream on a pipeline, it surfaces in our service territory. One of the other challenges is during that distributed infrastructure solution we put in, we built 5 compressed natural gas sites in downstate New York. They're state-of-the-art, process safety enhanced systems. However, but on the coldest days of the year, when we're going to need all 5 of those sites, we're going to have to truck 240 CNG tankers in a day to operate those sites for peak shaving in the morning and peak shaving in the afternoon. That proposes a series of reliability challenges in itself. One of the challenges that you get is it's a 5-day cycle to nominate and get those trucks in place. We have mitigated some of that risk at 2 or 3 of the sites. We can actually have full-time winter storage, but it's still a 12-hour nomination to get all the right people from the trucking company there to operate it. So they're, unlike our big liquefied natural gas plants, which we have 2, one in Greenpoint in Brooklyn and the other out on Long Island. Those are manned 24/7 all year round and are available for us to address any supply contingencies. The big challenge with the LNG tanks is there's only a limited supply for the winter. We have a 1.6 billion cubic feet in New York City, and we have 600,000 cubic feet on Long Island. And if you drain that, there's really no ability to refill it during the winter. Just also, we do have we have 1 CNG site in upstate New York. We're building a second, but we've maxed out our capability of building CNG sites. We've maxed out our capability from an expertise perspective to manage the complexity around it, to manage the trucking around it. The original reason we got into building them is we actually had a very unique set of skills within our company. Not only do I do a lot of stuff for New York, I also operate the gas system in New England, and I run our LNG plants, and we have a LNG trucking company in New England that I run. We brought the combination of all those skills together in portable pipeline operations, which allowed us to build out a safe and reliable operation on CNG. But even when you get into the long-term plan report and the PA consulting report, there is concern that we are over-reliant on CNG in the downstate region. If we switch to the next slide, I think I'll talk a little bit about Winter Storm Elliott. So Winter Storm Elliott was a big challenge for us. We came in within about 20 minutes of proactively shedding load of 30,000 customers in order to preserve the overall system. The big challenge that we've seen, we saw it in a couple of places. Winter Storm Elliott, we were able to just barely get by without having an outage. But for years, we operated the gas system in Rhode Island. And in 2019, we lost Aquidneck Island, which is where Newport is, with a very similar weather pattern that I'm going to describe here. So what we've seen with climate change over the last 10 years is you used to see the winter get cold, stay cold, right? And then it would gradually warm up. And I think we've all seen it. I talk to, when people ask me about climate change all the time, I grew up on Long Island, 60 years old. Never rained on Long Island when I was a kid. Every winter, never rained. My kids barely see snow now. They see rain all the time, right? So things have changed. Climate's gotten warmer, right? We can't deny that. There's things that we have to do. One of the problems that we've seen is a change in the weather patterns. So you all seen it, like you'll be a 30-degree day, then you'll get 2 days of 55, 60-degree weather, and then you'll get a 30 or 40-degree temperature swing overnight. That temperature swing is incredibly hard for gas systems to adjust to. So the first problem is that the interstate pipelines have challenges building up their line pack to the right level, because they don't need as much on the warm day, and when you get that big swing overnight, then you need a vast amount more on the cold day. The second problem is you almost always see with these cold fronts that come in like that, you see precipitation, right? You see rain that changes to freezing rain, that changes to snow. It's that freezing rain that causes the biggest challenge. On Winter Storm Elliott, that's what you saw with the challenges in the production fields with freeze-offs. With Aquidneck Island, that was one of the big challenges they had in Rhode Island too, was freeze-offs. So with Winter Storm Elliott, the challenge started with freeze-offs in the production fields, and the production fields saw a drop in supply. That dropped the pressure into the pipelines, and the pipelines rely on big compressor stations. They've made lots of investments to renew those compressor stations, but those compressor stations require a certain amount of pressure at the inlet for them to operate. If it drops below that pressure, they trip off, and it takes them hours and hours and hours to cycle them back on. And during that time period, you see the pressures in the gas system on the pipelines that lead up to our gates start to crash. We saw this happen upstream of us on the Transco system on Winter Storm Elliott. The freeze-offs caused low suction inlet pressures at the compressor stations. The compressor stations kicked offline. There was no ability to continue to pack the lines with gas. And we saw our pressures at our Long Beach gate station drop down to within about 50 pounds of the required inlet pressure. What happens when it drops below that is I don't get any more gas through that. So we had to make decisions. We have a series of load shedding procedures. We went through all of them. We kicked those 160,000 decatherms worth of customers, the TCs, they came off. We did our notifications for the thermostats. A lot of that came off, but there's only so much. The CNG site, we had a couple mobilized, they went on. We brought all our LNG on, and we still saw the systems continue to crash. At that point, we operate high and low pressure gas systems, which becomes a big challenge. Low pressure gas systems are very challenging to work with. They operate at a 1/4 of a pound of pressure. Okay, it doesn't have a lot of gas in it. There isn't a lot of line pack. The Brooklyn system, about 750,000 customers, is an integrated low pressure system designed and engineered and built out, not at the turn of the 20th century, back in the 1900s. So when we looked at that, then we had to make a decision on, well, where do we want that outage to manifest itself? That is an incredibly challenging system if you have an outage on. So what we would do is we would set that outage to actually happen up in Northwest Nassau, which was about 29,000 customers, high pressure system, easier to restore. But the big challenge is in gas restorations are vastly different from electric restorations. So when there's an electric system problem, breakers open, they trip off, you get the lines fixed, you put a breaker back in, you can bring in 50 or 100,000 customers at once. When a gas system goes dark, we have to physically shut the system down, all the valves. We have to go out and get into every single home, make sure the gas is shut off to every single home, make sure that there are no leaks, make sure it's safe. Then we have to come back in and re-energize that gas system. Means we have to bring back the line pack, get any air pockets out, and then we have to get back into every single home and turn them back on. That requires us typically to get locksmith, the police to be involved. We've unfortunately been involved with two of the largest in the country. One was Superstorm Sandy. It's a different case study, different issue. We had to rebuild that system. But the Aquidneck Island one was 7,000 customers. It was two low pressure systems, 400 on one, 7,000 on the other. That was a 10-day restoration in 20-degree weather, and it cost about $30 million. Right? Very expensive, very slow. I'd also tell you that was the smoothest restoration I've ever seen in my career. Right? And when you get involved with 20, 30, 40, or 100,000 customers, it's going to be very, very, very challenging. That's why gas system reliability really needs to be a focus, especially in the short term as we enable the energy transition, right? One of the big challenges is there is no N-1 planning contingency on the gas systems, right? We have no reserve margins. We have no contingencies. Our system is constrained. We only have the gas that we're contracted for that peak day. So any outage upstream of us, we have little to no flexibility in how we manage that. And if we can't delay things long enough and we can't shave enough, we will eventually have an outage on our system. So again, I'll just go back to Winter Storm Elliott. We were within a half hour having to make that call, and then we saw the pressure start to recover because Transco finally got a compressor backup on upstream of us. So I'll just close with a couple of things. New York requires a policy approach that is focused on gas reliability as it's on electrical reliability, and that recognizes that increasing interdependencies between electric and gas supply. I did fail to mention before, when we forecast, there's two things that aren't in our forecast for gas supply. One is large loads, new loads that come onto the system, like a Micron in upstate New York or a Belmont. Those aren't forecasted in the economics. They only show up in our forecast when somebody comes and presents that to us. So we don't have incremental supply a lot of times for that. The other one is electric generation. We don't forecast electric generation forward because we only forecast for our firm customers, and electric generation in our service territories are non-firm customers. They're basically 30-day interruptible, and we interrupt them over 30 days over the winter in order to supply gas for our firm customers. So when you go looking forward for economic development for the large loads or for increased generation to support the energy transition, from a firm perspective, that is not modeled in our gas forecast. So there needs to be a comprehensive gas system transition planning process, building on the long-term planning process and the Climate Action Council scoping plan recommendations. Gas reliability planning framework that is robust to ensure that we have contingencies of supply to address issues like Winter Storm Elliott. And then at the national and federal level, there needs to be interstate pipeline reliability standards to reduce the risk of upstream outages and contingencies.
Awesome, Ross. Thanks very much. So, I mean, a bit of a takeaway is that as much as we think that that the gas system and the electric system might sound the same, they actually are really quite unique systems and really depend on very unique solution sets. And I think that that's what we always need to keep in mind. Running a little over, but Doreen, I'll give you the prerogative if we have questions, or do we need to move on?
We need to move on.
There we go. Okay.
Well, thank you for the
Thank
opportunity.
you. Thank you for coming in and providing that context and the specific example that I think is quite useful as we plan. And appreciate you coming in, Ross. Thank you for joining us. Moving on to our next agenda item, I will get us on schedule, but I need my speakers to help me. During our last board meeting, we heard from interagency staff on topical areas being developed for the draft state energy plan. And today we will continue to hear from staff who are contributing to those areas. Today we're going to hear from staff leading development of 3 areas. For each, they're going to provide an overview of the key themes, recommendations that are under development, and time permitting, after the panel speaks, we will have time for questions. So first, I'll introduce agency staff who will speak to economic development, industry, and agriculture. For this presentation, we have Dave Whipple, Senior Director for Industry Development at Empire State Development, Sean Milderig, Program Manager for Demonstration Projects at NYSERDA, and Elizabeth Walters, Deputy Commissioner for the state's Department of Agriculture and Markets. Over to you.
Thanks, Doreen, and thank you to the board. I'll do my best to be brief here today. If we can advance to the next slide. So I'd like to start out with 2 key themes that I believe serve as kind of an anchor for the rest of the themes and recommendations we'll be discussing today. Firstly, our analysis indicates that there's likely to be substantial growth in energy demand in the industrial sector. So state stakeholders should be focused on ensuring that the provision of that power is reliable and affordable and is done in ways that align with the state climate goals. Secondly, while the clean energy transition no doubt presents challenges, it should also be recognized as an economic development opportunity that can lead to job growth, localized supply chains, reductions in cost, and increased New York State capacity to make the clean energy projects we'll need to execute the clean energy transition. These 2 key themes will kind of permeate and we'll return to throughout the presentation today. Can we go to the next slide? And here I just want to focus on 3 additional items that kind of, once again, permeate underneath all of the recommendations we'll be making today. We'll need to maintain a keen eye on resiliency. We want to make sure that all of the activities that we're pursuing center and focus investments in disadvantaged communities and make sure that we are providing beneficial impacts. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're identifying cross-cutting opportunities where economic development opportunities can have beneficial impacts on industry, and industrial activity can likewise lead to economic development in the provision of clean energy products and equipment. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave to take the next slide.
Good afternoon. And yeah, one thing that I know Commissioner Knight and certainly I believe the other commissioners on the board have seen is that there are some very large energy intensive users looking at New York State, locating in New York State, and that's expected to grow. And so there's a set of recommendations that go along with that. And certainly one of them is, in the spirit of the board, expanded interagency collaboration on meeting these needs and capturing these opportunities, as well as some other things in tailoring rate design, exploring opportunities for further private sector development of clean, firm energy, but also to really examine the challenges presented by emerging energy intensive subsectors such as data centers, and really getting a clear picture of both the benefits and the challenges that they present. Next slide, please. So, and investments in our energy infrastructure are really critical for capturing the opportunity at the moment in a very competitive landscape. So again, we need to further collaborate to meet this need. There are some efforts underway to provide shovel-ready, power-ready sites that are needed for these large economic job creation sorts of opportunities. And furthermore, something that we're collaborating closely with NYSERDA on is capturing the benefit of the opportunity that created by the markets for clean energy industries. So we're deploying clean energy at large scales, and there's a supply chain opportunity there as well that we should capture. And with that, back to Sean.
Thanks. We can go to the next slide. So as I noted previously, industrial energy use is projected to grow. So therefore, we think it's crucial that every effort's made to manage that growth through energy efficiency, and also to have a keen eye towards electrifying processes that are typically driven by fossil fuels. We've highlighted here the need to continue funding programs that provide technical assistance for efficient and electrified technologies, as well as direct support for implementation of those types of technologies and energy efficiency opportunities. When we do offer those programs, we note that there should be a particular focus on process heating, which is essentially heating that's for anything other than space conditioning, typically the production or treatment of manufactured goods. Process heating represents the lion's share of industrial energy demand. So focus there should pay increased benefits. Additionally, wasted heat in the production processes is a missed opportunity. So here we are recommending any and all opportunities to either recycle that heat on site, or to leverage it in potential thermal energy networks in some sort of clustered or co-located environment. And lastly, in all of these activities, we want to make sure that we continue to increase our understanding of the public health benefits of these types of initiatives to properly value them. Next slide. And while energy efficiency and electrification are very important, deep emissions reductions within the industrial space will require solutions that are either very nascent or have yet to be developed at all. So here we are recommending support for medium and long-term decarbonization of industry through a diverse research demonstration RD&D portfolio of emerging technologies. We want this to be targeted to subsectors where we've identified that there are not great alternatives, and those with particularly high heat requirements to manufacture their goods. It's difficult to electrify very high heat in a lot of subsectors. Here we once again want to prioritize opportunities for clustered infrastructure where we're leveraging things like alternative fuels or low carbon fuel sources, such that you have an opportunity to closely locate the generating equipment with the industrial company. We likewise recommend the pursuit of risk-sharing mechanisms with multiple different stakeholders from the federal government, other states, and industry to kind of de-risk and reduce the barriers to adoption for some of these technologies. And once again, we want to make sure that any alternative fuel use prioritizes greenhouse gas emissions while also minimizing co-pollutant emissions from the continued use of the fuel. And with that, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you. So first and foremost, we have 5 recommendations in front of us in the plan. The first is really to expand climate resilient farming to continue to address some of the concerns. An example would be recently we've expanded the program to allow for replacing diesel-powered water pump systems to help with their, improved irrigation. As we do deal with these increased weather systems, we're having extreme drought, we're having extreme rain. So having farmers have the opportunity to be able to utilize those high efficiency irrigation systems really makes a big improvement. Secondly, access to phase 3 power is a real problem with upgrading systems for farms, whether they're transitioning away from fossil fuel systems, growing a multitude of areas. So where we can with the CRF program, we like to help to cover costs for upgrades for phase 3 power, but we'd also like to coordinate with NYSERDA to create and expand existing programs to support efficient electrification systems on farms, including phase 3 power systems. We also want to look more on the measurement, monitoring, verification of energy efficiency and co-benefits associated with the adoption of conservation practices. We have a lot of conservation practices that we do cost share programs for at the department that really help remove the pass across a field. So there's a lot less energy used with farmers not taking the tractor back and forth. So reducing tillage, cover crops, those types of systems really do reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. So how can we do more of that and capture that information so everybody is aware of how those impact? Also looking at programs and incentives to facilitate more pilot projects around small-scale digester systems that incorporate innovative technologies to really help not only produce RNG, but also the main goal here is really to minimize methane emissions. So linear generation systems can be a really good potential for small and large-scale systems. They're cost-effective for electric production, utilizing dairy anaerobic digestion. Large-scale community digestion projects also might help smaller facilities band together and be able to manage resources and cost and be able to better electrify and decarbonize industrial food systems, food processing systems, and industrial systems that are hard to decarbonize or electrify. Moving on, supporting increased research and development on co-digestion as well. Notably, food waste may have 2 to 3 times the potential for energy production than manure systems. So co-digestion really could be an efficient method to increase energy output while reducing methane emissions from the degradation of food waste. The biogas output may be used again to combine heat systems and to generate electricity and heat for the grid and or a farm. So we're committed to continue to support our farms and the industry become more energy efficient while adapting to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean, David, and Elizabeth. Again, we'll see where we are with time at the end. Hopefully we'll have time for a question or two. But thank you for your presentation and your work on this cross-cutting effort. I'll now introduce Brandon Owens, NYSERDA's Vice President for Innovation, who will present on energy innovation. Over to you, Brandon.
Thank you, President Harris. I just wanted to start by making the point that state support of energy innovation really plays an essential role in catalyzing the development and commercialization of a whole set of technologies that are going to help New York achieve its energy transition. Innovation helps reduce the cost of and increase the performance of these emerging technologies, and the state's extensive research and innovation hubs play an important role in supporting energy technologies and stimulating economic development. When we think of state support of innovation, it's really, and the innovation program in general, it's really about 3 pillars. 1 is the research and development program, 2 is the commercialization program, and 3 is the partnerships that help us strengthen and leverage the innovation ecosystem. I'm going to talk about each of those pillars on the slides ahead. Slide. So continued state investment in energy innovation helps catalyze the development and adoption of emerging energy technologies that enable the transition. The recommendations we're making in the State Energy Plan are to continue to fund RD&D that's aligned with key priorities and problem statements identified across all energy sectors. This is going to accelerate the deployment of technologies, increase the performance, and reduce the cost. One of the keys here is that we're using innovation to reduce the cost of emerging technologies. These cost reductions, when the technologies are deployed, are going to ripple through the state energy system and improve affordability across that system. And so we really see innovation as a key lever for improving affordability for the state of New York. We also recommend a continued support of commercialization activities, startup growth, and bringing market-ready products and businesses to New York. So this involves cultivating homegrown businesses, but also attracting new startup businesses to the state. Then we're going to continue to commission, recommendations continue to commission studies and performance evaluations to provide objective information to the public on the trade-offs in cost, performance, environmental benefits, and policy compatibility of emerging and existing energy technologies. Some examples here are the 0x40 study, but also a recent hydrogen roadmap that we released. See some of the existing state actors on this slide, and all of them are providing direct and indirect support for our innovation efforts across the state. Slide. Let me talk about partnerships and how they are important to strengthening the innovation ecosystem and leveraging the state infrastructure that we have to foster economic development and create jobs. So this is about coordination among regional and statewide technology partnerships, and it's really critical to continuing to drive innovation and attracting new talent and industry to the state. So this is about expanding and leveraging, which is a pretty impressive innovation ecosystem in the state, by connecting those pieces and really maximizing the value of the current state ecosystem infrastructure to stimulate innovation. What does this look like? Some of our recommendations here are to formalize partnerships across the entire New York State ecosystem that's working with public and private organizations and universities to accelerate the deployment of key technologies, including the development of strategic roadmaps to align broader priorities in the innovation ecosystem. It's also about partnerships to train the future clean energy workforce through our educational institutions here in the state of New York. There is a shortage right now of talented clean energy workers, and so we're working with the educational institutions to help cultivate that work state. Next piece is about coordinating with universities and community organizations to establish a set of effective and feasible best practices for integrating these priorities in working with disadvantaged communities. This includes the development of demonstration sites at DACs, project participation, project benefits, and assessments. And the last piece here is about building on successful models of innovation to leverage the combined market share and economies of scale to accelerate cost reduction and market adoption of these new energy technologies. One example here is the New York City Housing Authority. We did some demonstrations there on window-mounted heat pumps that led to a large purchase at scale of those heat pumps. And so the model here is to work with partners with large purchasing power through demonstrations. So if those demonstrations are successful, they can immediately make a large purchasing decision and deploy the technologies into the market. Slide. The last piece here is the crucial role that New York's education system plays in the state's clean energy innovation efforts. It not only provides education and workforce development, but also drives research and commercialization efforts and hosts large-scale demonstration projects. So investing in the state's clean energy technology education pipeline can really produce the talent that we need to develop and scale emerging technologies. Recommendations here are about continuing to prioritize and expand SUNY's clean energy research and education portfolio, leverage SUNY's successful research task force model to include clean energy innovation and related focus areas, and to continue to support commercialization investments through the recruitment of researchers, business education, market training, and incubation space to create the leadership and support for early stage startups and key emerging technologies. And so New York's education infrastructure plays a crucial role in helping the state transition to a clean energy future. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Next slide, please. Our last presenters will be Sasha Berger, Policy Advisor at the New York Department of Labor, and Amy Bell-Pasht, Project Manager on the Policy Development Team at NYSERDA, who will present on the energy workforce and a just transition topic.
Great. Thank you, President Harris. Next slide, please. New York's energy workforce employs over 300,000 workers. Roughly half of these workers are employed in the clean energy sector, meaning jobs that support renewables, energy efficiency, building decarbonization, clean transportation, and more. While New York's clean energy workforce is already one of the most advanced in the country, it has continued to grow steadily. In fact, 2023 marked the largest year-over-year increase in new clean energy workers since we began tracking in 2016. Next slide, please. As we heard during Sean's presentation, clean energy transition is an economic opportunity, with job growth being one of the most important markers of its success. Not only have these jobs been growing, but analysis shows they're paid a premium. On average, New York's clean energy workers earn 12% more than their counterparts in other industries, pointing to the high quality of these jobs. And most importantly, it is these workers that drive the industry forward and make the transition possible. Looking ahead, we expect demand for these jobs to continue to grow. And with that demand comes the additional need for training and extensive policy coordination. Here, we see state support for workforce development as an essential piece of making progress on our energy transition. But I'll note, as has been clear from progress in developing the clean energy industry, both in offshore wind and electric vehicles, that the state is just one part of a larger workforce ecosystem, which is also comprised of K through 12 schools, technical high schools, and colleges, universities, unions, nonprofit training partners, and private industry. And none of these players can meet the growing needs alone. At a high level, Sasha and I will walk through 4 key areas in which the state can and should continue to play an active role. Next slide, please. Great. So our first theme is workforce development programming. Since 2016, the state has invested over $200 million in clean energy workforce development. These investments play a critical role in expanding capacity of training providers, upskilling workers, facilitating job placement, and supporting wraparound services. Over the next 15 years, the time horizon of the plan, this programming will need to continue to be responsive to market trends, including targeting workforce development to occupations where shortages are projected. This can include transportation technicians and construction trades, as well as others. Starting early in the life cycle of workforce development, the state should expand clean energy career awareness in K through 12 schools, including investing in training and resources for teachers. And as we move along in the life cycle of workforce development, New York should also continue its support of SUNY and CUNY systems, which play a critical role in educating and training our energy workforce, and, as Brandon touched on, in expanding the state's capacity to foster emerging technologies. And finally, mentioned in this last bullet, we should continue to support direct entry and pre-apprenticeship programs, which are valuable programs which prepare clean energy workers for apprenticeships. Next slide, please. As part of the energy planning process, the state is actively assessing future needs and emerging technologies in clean energy. For example, we can expect workforce development efforts will need to be tailored to meet several emerging needs. First, the need to expand and upskill the energy efficiency workforce, which is essential to meeting our building decarbonization goals, including but not limited to the decarbonization of state operations. Next, to meet the growing demand for building and maintaining new transmission and distribution infrastructure as we meet our reliability needs and increase electric loads, as well as supporting further investments in storage, solar, thermal energy networks, wind, and transportation electrification. And finally, we'll need to evolve programs to build up transferable skills that could support future nuclear development. Next slide, hand it to Sasha.
Thank you, Amy. In addition to workforce development funding, the state plays a large role in promoting good job quality once a worker lands a job in the energy industry. Labor standards are a key tool to improve the quality of life of workers who drive the transition. And these standards can also minimize inequality, generate local economic benefits, and improve project outcomes. The state has made progress on implementing laws that promote labor standards on clean energy projects, including things like prevailing wage requirements, apprenticeship utilization requirements, and other policies that promote worker safety and labor peace. That said, the clean energy industry is highly varied, and there's no one-size-fits-all set of labor standards that will guarantee high job quality. So our recommendation here is that New York State should conduct landscape analysis research to assess the coverage of labor standards across energy sectors. This research would allow the state to better identify opportunities to expand coverage so that workers are well protected across the board, including on smaller scale projects, and particularly where the state is supporting the underlying clean energy project. Next slide. As we work to promote high job quality in energy jobs, we want to ensure that New Yorkers who have been disproportionately burdened by the impacts of climate change have access to good jobs in the growing clean energy sector. New York State already prioritizes clean energy workforce development funding for residents of New York's disadvantaged communities and other priority populations, such as veterans and justice-involved New Yorkers. But despite existing efforts, many of these communities still have less than proportional participation rates in clean energy training programs and jobs. So to continue attracting New Yorkers to the growing clean energy industry, the state will need to first continue to proactively promote clean energy jobs through targeted communication campaigns. This includes explaining clearly what clean energy jobs look like, what career pathways are possible, and what training is available to prepare for those jobs. The state should continue to partner with trusted community organizations for these types of campaigns. The state also needs to consider and address barriers to participation in job training, such as access to childcare or affordable transportation. To do this, state workforce development offices must continue to collaborate to fund these kinds of wraparound services for clean energy job trainees. And we should continue to expand job training that is customized to specific populations. For example, the state should expand existing workforce development programs in correctional facilities to include specific clean energy job training. Next slide. In addition to prioritizing the state's disadvantaged communities and clean energy jobs, our final theme is that New York must also support a just transition for fossil fuel workers who are at risk of job loss due to the transition. Currently, there are roughly 80,000 jobs in fossil fuel sectors across New York State. And over the next 15 years, some of these jobs may be impacted by New York State's energy transition. In 2023, the Department of Labor stood up the Office of Just Energy Transition, in part to connect transitioning energy workers to new opportunities in clean energy or other industries. Building on these efforts, we're recommending 3 next steps to support fossil fuel workers. First, the state should undertake research to assess more specifically how workers will be impacted by transitioning fossil fuel subsectors. And then using these findings, we should research and estimate the potential impacts of various safety net measures that could support at-risk workers. These measures could include wage guarantees, a bridge to retirement, transitional opportunities, support for communities facing plant closures, and more. And once the state analyzes the most effective safety net policies, we should consider additional funding for a just transition fund that could support those policies. So with that, we thank you for your time, and I'll hand it over to President Harris.
Thank you all, and thank you for the presentations for each of you. We have a couple of minutes, so if any of the members of the board have questions for any of the panelists, I'd open this up for perhaps 1 or 2 questions.
Hi, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I do have one question, and this is a topic that Commissioner Reardon and I and others within the Department of Labor really visit on a regular basis, of course. I'm curious about any information you have about what other states are doing to reskill or upskill incumbent fossil fuel workers so that you can, or they can drive a just transition, and what lessons can we take from that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I'm happy to answer. So our Office of Just Energy Transition is leading an interstate just transition group where it's different state just transition offices can learn best practices from one another and understand what they're doing. And these offices are fairly new across all states. One of the longest existing offices is in Colorado. They have a pretty specific focus on coal plant closures, but they're already providing some of the safety net mechanisms that I mentioned to workers and communities in Colorado, providing transitional navigators for fossil fuel workers who are facing job loss or potential job loss. And Illinois is another active member of this group, and they've recently launched a program to fund community supports for communities facing plant closures. It's a grant program. So the research we're suggesting through this plan would look at these policies more deeply so that we could see the impact in New York State and suggest the best safety net measures here.
Doreen, could I follow up on this a little? We've been asking over the last year to the Cornell Climate Jobs Institute to help get us some data about where these different programs end up being in New York State, because so often we're hearing, well, NYPA's doing this and here, or NYSERDA's just done this program which funds this. And I don't think anybody has a real overview of where we are really reaching a population. I mean, I know there's a lot of disadvantaged communities in the cities, but there's a lot in the rural areas too. And the transportation, we just got money in the state budget for work with laborers, for wraparound services, for childcare and transportation. But I know, those were focused on two particular areas. There's a lot of the rest of the state. And I don't know whether that's something that people, in your department are looking at, but I wish that we would, because I would love for us to have a better sense of, where the job development gaps are and how we can address them, because there are projects all over, there are, community colleges all over, and if we can really engage the whole state, we'd be a lot better off. So, thank you.
I can share that is certainly one of the themes that has come up in the development of this plan, both between Sasha and I and between agencies, especially as we have newer players joining the workforce development ecosystem. NYPA's expanded capacity and budget, as well as ESD's new Office of Workforce Development. So there are new players in addition to this need to map the existing ecosystem. So we've actually had conversations with Climate Jobs Institute as well. We're sort of hoping to meet that need, but I think it's work in progress is the answer, and we'd like to get to the bottom of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Assemblymember Barrett, and also for your answers, panelists. Next slide, please.
Doreen, do we have time for one quick question? No, never mind. I was getting a look. It's not that important. Thank you.
I'm not trying to be difficult. We've just, hopefully folks can stick around for a minute afterward. We've been tight on time this whole day. But I will turn and just ask if the members have any other business to bring before the board. Hearing none, I'll move to our final slide. I do want to thank all board members and their delegates for coming to this energy plan meeting, for your participation today, and to the members of the public who observe this meeting here in Albany and via the webcast. Please visit our website to sign up for ongoing email updates. We will be meeting again soon. And for now, though, the meeting of the State Energy Planning Board is hereby adjourned. Thank you all.